So I want to talk about a subject that I think deserves more attention, because the more we talk about the subject of sexual abuse in the Jehovah's Witness organization, or in general even, that's how change can happen in these organizations and in the policies that these organizations use to deal with these type of issues and cases and such. So a lot of times, like what I've come across in my experience, and also also in reading and viewing videos about this subject, you'll see like active Jehovah's Witnesses comment, and they'll say, well, that's what Satan wants Jehovah's organizations to look bad. So that's why all these allegations are coming out. Or, apostates are putting out alleged stories because they're angry and they're bitter at the organization. Or they'll just be passive about it, or apathetic, where it exists everywhere. They're imperfect humans. Jehovah is going to deal with it in his own time. Wait on Jehovah. It'll be dealt with, or it is dealt with, this type of thing. But the way, and even like, I read somewhere that this comment of an active Jehovah's Witness actually saying that the way the organization handles child abuse cases is probably, it's probably as good or slightly better than what other organizations do. And I was like, are you kidding me? Like, you really want to do that kind of sliding scale of who's better than who in dealing badly with sexual abuse cases? Anyways, so I want to highlight some fails with the Jehovah's Witness organization policies as they are. And I'm going to go through a few of them right now. And so some of their fails, like their first fail is the two-witness rule. If you as a victim, you come forward, but you only have one witness, there's no case. We have to wait for another victim who's courageous enough to come forward. Or you have to have two witnesses to child abuse before any action is taken, which is ridiculous, because any of these things, as anyone knows, it always happens in a private, secret place. Like, there's never two people that are witnesses to this type of thing. Another fail. Victims have to tell their story in detail to 2 or 3 older elders, unqualified men. They have no training and no experience in handling such testimonies, especially not when from a child. And very often, the men that are handling the case, they're very often friends with the abuser because they're in the same congregation. It's dealt with in that exact congregation. So another fail. Victims are rarely encouraged to go to the police. Jehovah's organization never go to the police unless it's something, obvious, I suppose, but I've never actually heard that. I'm sure if any of you have, please come forward and just put it in the comments so everyone else can see that. But I've never seen or ever heard of the Jehovah's organization reporting that to the police. Like, these type of things are always dealt with internally, and then it always resorts back to the two-witness rule, or we wait on Jehovah and this sort of thing. Sorry. Another fail is Jehovah's Witnesses are normally extremely reluctant to drag their brothers in front of the magistrates, and they're encouraged to wait for Jehovah, which basically means do nothing, because secular authorities are considered to be in Satan's power. And then you add that to the huge pain and effort that it takes any abuse victim to go to the police. There's virtually no case ever reported. And so that continues to be a perfect environment for child abusers. they don't get dealt with. They might get a little in private. You shouldn't be around. You shouldn't just be alone with sister so and so, or that type of reprimand. But they're not dealt with. They're not properly gone to the authorities so that there can be an open case or an active case where this actually happened. Because as other victims come forward, which they will, if this person is an actual abuser, which there's a likelihood that that's happening, if they're being dealt with in a back room, saying don't hang around alone with sisters or whatever, then obviously there's nothing that's truly being done that's going to help the situation going forward. So another fail, that all Jehovah's Witnesses, they're constantly led to believe that Jehovah's people are safe and a clean people. And I know that from experience, that growing up and through my life as a Jehovah's Witness, I always felt that everyone was better, and you're taught that, like, we're clean, we're Jehovah's people. I had never even heard of, and I'm sorry for being so naive, but when I was like in my 20s, I had never even heard of this type of thing happening in the organization. And until I had talked with a sister that had moved into our congregation, she was married to a brother in our hall. And we were talking one time, and she goes, we were talking about our parents and all this kind of stuff. And I said, I kind of have like a dysfunctional relationship with my parents, whatever. And she goes, oh, well, and she said that your dad, was he sexually abusive to you? And I'm like, what? Like, I was like so shocked that she'd even say anything like that. I'd never even heard of anything like that. But then she went on to explain that her dad was. And so she just kind of, I guess, in her congregation, which was it was in Seattle area, and she moved anyways up to Canada. But anyways, in her congregation, there was a lot of that, and so and she dealt with it very young from her dad, and I think there was also an uncle. But anyways, and all through her family, and she'd heard this from other sisters, other friends of hers. So that was my first kind of like shocker into realizing that this was actually happening. And then another one of my friends, like a few years later, she went on to tell me about her ex-husband who had actually been abusing their daughter. And then they got divorced and all the rest of it. And it was really horrible. But that one came down to the 2-person or 2-witness rule. And so it never actually went to authorities. And so I was, all these type of things that came out, I was shocked because I'd never experienced, I'd never been around that, which, thankfully, as a kid, right? So when it comes back to like Jehovah's people are safe and clean people, if you're a Jehovah's Witness watching this, I'm thinking that you probably have some questions around, otherwise you wouldn't probably be here in the first place. But it's not true. I mean, they're just as imperfect as any other people, but the problem here is that they have policies that work against the victim and for the abuser. So their policies need to change, and that's where the problem lies. And so we're not comparing with other organizations here. We're just talking about our experience in this organization. So also as Jehovah's Witnesses, and I remember hearing this as well from the stage, where they were told that anyone spreading information about Jehovah's Witness child abuse, they're lying apostates. So they're being told that they're apostates because they're angry, they're bitter, whatever. Those poor people, they're of Satan's world now. They're friends with the devil's world. And they're told from the stage that these are lies, they're blatant attacks to Jehovah's system and Jehovah's organization. It's very hard to beat that mindset, to understand that there's actually a bigger organizational issue that's really taking place here. Another fail from the organization is if the religion takes any action, It's either by counseling the abuser not to be alone with children or by expelling him from the congregation, which it doesn't happen that often unless they're completely exposed, such as with the Royal Commission that was formed in Australia, which I'll mention a few more things on that too. So, but in the former case where they counsel the abuser not to be alone with children, but they don't actually warn parents. So they don't warn parents that there's actually an abuser in their congregation, in their midst. They're going in service with them. They're having social times together. They're seeing them on a many times a week through all the meetings at the congregation. They don't realize that there's an abuser in their midst. The elders are covering this up. So they're doing nothing to actually protect children inside or outside of the religion, because they're also not being told to the authorities that this person, this abuser, is actually within their midst, right? And then another huge fail from all this, aside from the policies, right? So the policies, the 2-witness rule, big fail. But here's a big fail right off the bat. The counseling. There's no counselors. There's no counselors in the Jehovah's Witness organization that are set up in a local congregation setting. There's no counselors. The brothers there, they have no training in psychology. They have no training in abuse, sexual abuse. They have no training in this. If you think of your own congregations that you're involved in or have been involved in the past, like from my experience, most of the brothers that were in any position of authority, like the elders, they were in the trades. So painters, in the construction, mechanics, farmers, janitors, like these type of businesses, right? I don't recall one doctor or one psychologist ever in any of the congregations that I've been involved with, or any elders that I've ever seen speak, actually. So if you have, I'd love to hear that comment as well. So, please share. But I think that's a huge fail that here, as a victim, you're supposed to go to the shepherds of the congregation. You go there, you tell them what happened. They have no idea. I mean, it's shocking. Like, one of the articles that I read recently had to do with this lady, and she was coming forward about the abuse that happened to her as a child, and how when she actually came forward about it, she came forward and was crying, of course, and she was saying, sorry, I'm so sorry. So she's actually saying sorry, but which is, if you're from Canada, you know all about sorry, but she was saying sorry. But there's also that thing about being a victim where you feel that you made that happen, right? Either you were told that, or you feel there was something about that made you feel guilty, right? Which is so common, apparently. I'm not a psychologist, but I definitely study it. But there's so much about that is you need to have the proper counselor in place to actually recognize that behavior isn't actually admitting guilt. It's actually part of the victim, right? So back to, that's a fail. The counselors, the counseling that happens in the congregation, they're not true counselors. They're painters, they're mechanics, they're business people of other sorts. They're janitors, they're pioneers. They're not trained properly for this type of trauma that happens with people. And then and what fails out of that is that the victims, they suffer from guilt, heavy guilt, especially if it's not dealt with properly, which most of them aren't being dealt with properly because of these bad, horrible policies that the organization continues with, right? So the victims, they end up suffering from depression, anxiety, even suicide. Like, it's really a horrible thing. And these victims, they do deserve change. They do deserve to have these abusers stopped. And the only way that this can happen is if we can continue talking about this and sharing this stuff, so that the organization has no choice, because it is coming out, and it is coming out to the authorities that this is how the policies are in the organization. So with the Royal Commission that was formed in Australia, which I'm sure many of you watching this have already viewed it and read it, but I think it was really an important time for these things to start coming out. Also, like with the Me Too movement that started last year, I think that all of these things are really helping to give victims their voice, not just with sexual abuse within the Jehovah's Witness organization, but on a societal change, a culture change, right? I'm just reading this paragraph from the Royal Commission. So the Commission's final report points out child abuse victims, or child sexual abuse, almost invariably occurs in private, where the only witnesses to the abuse are the perpetrator and the victim. So the two-witness rule shows a failure by the organization to recognize that the rule will more often than not operate in favor of the perpetrator of child abuse, who will not only avoid sanction, but also remain in the congregation and the community with their rights intact and with the capacity to interact with their victim and other children. I'm so glad that they actually made that statement, to actually, that's been shared out a lot, and I think it needs to continue that way. And there's a recent, and from the Royal Commission, if you haven't looked into it, which you probably have, but I thought it was really great too. I'm just going to mention that there was complaints of the Jehovah's Witness, the records, that they kept records of sexual abuse allegations since 1950, and complaints against 1,006 of its Australian members. Among those, 579, which is 57% of those, admitted to sexually abusing children. So they admitted it, so they confessed. So there's only 401 were disfellowshipped, and over half of those were later reinstated by the organization. So 230 are back in the organization. Hopefully, or I don't know, like I just feel like they're probably not in the same congregation, but now they moved on to another. Anyways, the Royal Commission found in all of those cases that there was no evidence that the Jehovah's Witnesses notified authorities about a single case of those 1,006 cases. So it's pretty daunting. It's pretty huge, right? So there's an excellent article that came out in January, and I'm going to share it in a link in my description. And it's from the UC Observer, and it's with a focus on Canadian Jehovah's Witness victims. So in Canada, if you haven't read about this or heard about this, in Canada, where I'm from, there's a national class action that's seeking $66 million in compensation from the Jehovah's Witness organization for survivors of sexual assault. So I'm really glad that all these things are coming out, and I'm happy to use this channel to speak about that today, and about the fails of the Jehovah's Witness organization to actually step up and make policy changes so that this will stop, and so that the proper authorities will be let known when these things are happening. But I think most importantly, and not most importantly, but also important, is I really hope that the organization will make changes to how they deal with victims, so that victims will actually feel like they do have a counselor to go to actually deal with this. So that's not frowned upon as given the Bible and you should just read your scripture, wait on Jehovah. Like, that is not counseling. So I'm really hoping that change that as well. So a lot of fails, but there's a lot of room for them to make positive changes, and I hope that they do. Okay, that's it for me. I'm going to share links below, and thanks for the thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll see you next week. Cheers.